Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Before we get started, let me tell you about the only supplements that I use. For nearly 10 years, Bare Performance Nutrition has been on a mission to educate, inspire, and improve the performance of modern-day athletes, adventurers, and warriors through training, nutrition, and supplementation. With effective formulas that work as hard as you do and are third-party tested for prohibited substances, you can get results and reach your full potential with Bare Performance Nutrition. Head to the link in the show notes to go to the website to help me out and to help you out so that we can go one more together. Now, let's get to the episode. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast, episode 85. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and in Boston, Massachusetts, we have a very, very, very special guest, one of my favorite people, Christina Muccio. Mooch, how are you?
I'm so good. Thanks for having me back. I'm literally cheesing so hard.
We've recorded multiple podcasts together. This is the first time we've spoken on the Project Endure podcast.
Yeah.
And so while we know each other, there might be people out there who've heard us talk before.
Sure.
I'm going to start off with a story that people in this audience probably haven't heard, which was when we first connected, which was probably 2 years ago, maybe, right?
Yeah, at least. Yeah.
Something like that. We connected, and then me and Sam Tooley, who's episode 2 of this podcast, but prior we had the Pursuit podcast. He's like, yeah, we're recording with Christina Muccio. And I was like, who is that? And he's like, you know her. And I was like, I don't know a Christina Muccio. And he's like, Mooch, like her name is Mooch. I was like, oh, so I put 2 and 2 together. Your name is Christina Muccio. You go by Mooch. How did Mooch come about? Why don't we start there?
Honestly, Mooch is like a generational name that's gotten passed down. And it's funny because my mom has always been Mrs. Mooch. My dad was Mooch when he was growing up. My brother's Mooch. It's actually, there are very few people that actually know what my first name is. I had a coach for 14 years. I was a gymnast for a very long time. And I had a coach who didn't know my first name until I think it was like 7 years into my career. And the only reason she knew it was because I got injured and she was like waiting for the hospital to come or the ambulance to come. And they're like, what's her first name? And she's like, what's your first name? And I'm like, it's Christina. So
That's
yeah,
incredible.
Mooch is like a long-standing family name, which I love. So
Yeah, it fits you well.
yeah.
And so for people listening who don't know who Mooch is, if I were to just give you the floor, how would you
Sure.
introduce yourself?
Yeah, I am an entrepreneur. I'm a performance coach. So I work with people one-on-one, basically life coaching mixed with business and really everything that it rolls into what it means to be a human being. I think above all else, like there are so many things that we do and we do and we do, and really focusing on like the being of who we are. And I'm an athlete, love to work out, fitness fanatic. I kind of have my hands in a lot of different things. So just happy to be here.
Newly married? You left that
Newly
part out?
married. Yeah, we got married in October, which is wild. It feels like a year ago and not long ago at all. And we in October, right before we got married, I actually sold my business and gave myself a lot of space to just travel and really figure out what this next step was and really leaning into that every single day, which is so fun.
Yeah. Well, before we dive into all of that,
Yeah.
because I'm sure it'll come up, any guest who books a spot on the podcast has to answer a few questions. And one of those questions is, if you had to sum up your life in 2 sentences or less, what would it be? Do you remember what you put for your response to that question?
No, I don't. Was it good?
It was good. Yeah, I kind of want to unpack it. You wrote to the window, to the wall,
Oh, that's
period.
right. Oh,
Give so for people who don't understand what the reference is to,
Holy
why don't we
shit.
unpack that a little bit? Whether or not it is serious, I think it's worth exploring. So, where's that from?
I'm shook that I even wrote that. I think it was one of those things where I was like, yeah, I want to talk to Joe. Like, absolutely, put me on here. Um, it honestly it does wrap up my life quite well. I love music. I love having fun. I also I I think the where I used to get stuck a lot in life was taking things very serious, right? And allowing fun and play into my life has completely transformed everything that I do, from relationships to business building to, working with different partners to investing. Like it's all fun. And I think that's like such a great reminder. And I'm still laughing at myself that I even put that. And it's perfect, right? Like I think the opportunity that we have every single day to put our feet on the floor and take a big deep breath, it's like that's fun. Like that's really what we get to do and we get to lean into. So that's incredible. I did not know that I put that there. So here we are.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think it's an Einstein quote. I don't have this exact, but creativity is intelligence having fun, I believe is how it goes.
Mm,
And I feel like that sums you up very well. I see you as a very creative person. You have fun, you're intelligent, you combine the two.
mhm.
And every day, you're right, is an opportunity that we get to live. We get to do this. We
Yep.
don't have to do these things.
Yeah.
But when did that become your reality? Was that always the way you saw the world, or did it shift at some point?
Uh, it's a great question. I would say it definitely shifted. Um, when I was growing up, I had almost like split lives, right? And I think there's a lot of us probably in the entrepreneurial space that have some type of very similar story where you're living this life that you don't want to live, but you're masking it in some regard, right? Mine actually was it was really interesting. My dad was diagnosed with ALS when I was 9, and I smile because it honestly was an opportunity, right? For our family to come together, for us to lean into different ways of being, even as a family. But when I was 9, I was like, what the hell is this? Right? Like, what is this? So I did a lot of research. I was learning a lot. And anyone who grew up with me can attest, I was not a great student. Like I was so on the creative side. I just wanted to like play and figure out. And I was always curious. Um, but the reality is, as I got older and as my dad's disease, and for those of you who don't know, ALS basically strips you of your body, right? And your mind's completely intact. So I did a lot of studying around like, how does the brain and the body connect? How does the mind work? How does anatomy work? Which ultimately led me to the fitness industry, right? But I think in growing up, there was this home mooch, and there was like the outside mooch, right? And the home mooch was like, don't fuck up, right? Don't, nothing is as bad as what you're experiencing and watching right now. Um, you know, uh, Figure it out on your own, right? I learned all these patterns that I think now later in life, I'm like, cool, those served a purpose. And now I get to like flick those out of here because they don't serve anymore. And then there was the outside mooch who was really fun and playful and curious, right? Um, so I don't think it was always like that. I think the integration of the two has really allowed me to like step into this like kind of curious, competitive space that I love being in. But yeah, it definitely wasn't always like that. No.
Yeah. You alluded to something that I think will probably fit as the answer to this next question, but if I had to ask you what was the hardest thing you've ever had to handle in life, so circumstance that
Mm,
you did get to choose for yourself,
yeah.
is it having your dad go through ALS?
You know, I think I think yes. And I say I think because I've done so much work around it to the point where it's like the gratitude that I have for the experience, right? I couldn't go back and change it. Like if I could trade it, absolutely. Like take everything back just to like give me that experience back and that family, even that family dynamic back, right? But I would say there's so much gratitude that I find in that entire journey that I'm currently still on, that it's like, I'm actually very grateful that in like a kind of a twisted like way that, I was dealt a hand that ultimately led me to here, right? I think it taught me not only about myself, like this isn't even about me. This is about the bigger picture of like understanding why I'm on this planet and what I'm here for and who I get to serve and the relationships that I'm in and the perspective that I bring. And um ultimately I've learned that like this like servant leadership started when I was working with my dad, right? Like I don't know how many high school kids, even like middle school kids, were like feeding their dad breakfast before you went to school. Like that's not the reality for a lot of people. And yet I was still like class clown of my senior class. Of course I was, right? And I think that in looking back and processing so much and reflecting so much, I think the gratitude brings me back to like, okay, like we made this happen. Was it a terrible experience? Absolutely. I mean, there are days where like I didn't give a fuck, like, excuse my French, but like I didn't even care, right? Acting out, temper, like a lot of different things that kind of sprouted from that. It's actually very interesting, and I'm glad that you brought up my wedding because it was one of the most incredible experiences of my life. And then fast forward 2 weeks later, my husband, we were supposed to travel around Bali for about 3.5, 4-ish weeks. And third day in, he gets appendicitis. His appendix ruptures. He goes completely septic. Like I'm in panic mode. And it brought me right back to like, no wonder why like I was taught how to take care of someone. And no wonder why I was taught how to advocate for someone who couldn't advocate for themselves. No wonder why I've learned, the healthcare system in different ways and been able to communicate in different ways and understand the body. Like, of fucking course. Right. So it's moments like that where you're like, wow, this is the worst thing that could ever possibly happen to me. And look at all the things that I've already learned that can actually expedite the process of me moving through this. So it's wild. It's like there are definitely different ways that you can look at it. And there's always a lower vibration, a lower negative frequency that you experience in situations like that. And there's also a light to that. Like there's always a dark, there's always a light. So it's about what you choose to see.
Okay. I have a lot of follow up here.
Yeah, let's do it.
First, on a light note,
Yeah.
and let me ask, is your husband all right now?
Oh yeah, he's good
Okay,
now. He just
good.
looks like he had a C-section way before me. So
I laugh because my wife and I don't know if you know this, but my wife and I got married beginning of the pandemic, May
yep.
2020,
Yep.
small ceremony, and her appendix burst 3 days after we were married on our quote unquote honeymoon in Philadelphia in our apartment. So we share that in common. And at the time, she had to go. So you guys are in a foreign country. You're helping him navigate that. For us, it was almost the opposite. We're in Philadelphia. It's the beginning of COVID. I can't be in the hospital with her. So she's, 3 days married with me and she's now getting, surgery, emergency surgery. It's crazy, but all things work out. She's good. Your husband's good. We can laugh
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Um, you use the word and very intentionally, and I pick up on that because I also use the word and very intentionally, but I'm not, I just caught myself.
But
Like,
I'm
but
not.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't believe that most people understand why you and I put so much emphasis on the word and. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. There's something so powerful about acknowledging light and dark in every single thing, right? And I think the word but, I mean, I even learned this like, geez, when I graduated college, I went into corporate, which is a whole different experience in itself. Like me in a corporate setting, I'm like, what the fuck? And I was always taught whenever you're having a sales conversation and a negotiation conversation, if you're like, yeah, 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 but yeah, 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 replace the word but with like, and I don't give a fuck. Right. So it's like, well, you said this and this and this. I don't give a fuck. So here we go with this and this and this. Right. And it kind of correlates to the way that our brain actually receives information as well, and the way that we speak it into existence, right? And I think but has a very strong period on like an end of a something, and it almost like neglects the second half of whatever it is that you're saying, right? Like you can be two things at the same time. It's fine. Everyone's fine. We're not black or white. We're not like there's a gray period that we get to really experience. So that's why I use it. But it's funny because I always think back to like that early, like first sales job out of college, and they're like teaching me that but means I don't give a fuck. And all I wanted to do was say but. I'm like, but, and they're like, you don't give a fuck. So I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think we acknowledge often enough the duality of life and the fact that we can feel multiple things at once. We can be multiple things at once. Life is gray. There's not very much black and white, black or white, rather. And so I just wanted you to expand on that. I'm glad you did. The
Yeah.
other point I wanted to kind of circle back to is you've taken such a positive outlook on all of this. And you sit here now and you look back and there's a lot of positive to take away from it. When you were going through it, it wasn't the case, right? Especially in the beginning, it sounds like. What was the process like at a very high level to go from you just find out your dad has ALS, you understand what it is, you go through that process to the point where he's no longer here with you, and then you continue to process all of that to get to where you are now sitting here on this podcast. What was that like?
Yeah. Well, I think from even just like a neurological perspective, right? We go into fight or flight. So these moments are happening, and a lot of that fight mentality is it's reactive, right? It's doing what it's survival, right? I think when we step back and we reflect, it gives us a lot more of that space to really understand or attempt to understand. We might not even ever get an answer of it, right? But what we do is we find curiosity around like this happened. Okay, we can either look at it as this happened to me, this happened for me, this happened with me. Like so many ways that you can look at it, right? I think in the moment, and I experienced this a lot. I would say definitely in my more recent experience with Alex, as he's trying to get surgery in friggin' third world country. I wasn't trying to make sense of anything. My brain was survival, right? And I think that almost taps more into our intuitive side, which is really freaking cool because it allows us to stay exactly present in this exact moment versus like, let's make a fear-based decision, or let's go back and try and figure out how it worked for us in the past. No, it was like, this was my decision, no questions asked, keep going. What next? Right. So I think it's really that fight or flight, and you find yourself then afterwards kind of having, and I experienced this, I don't know if you had a very similar experience, but I got back from Bali, and I had like pretty bad social anxiety. Like I didn't even want to go to the grocery store. And I'm like a very introverted extrovert. Like people know me, they know that like I can hold, that extroverted side for quite a bit. But when I got back, I was in a very deep like processing, trying to figure out the answer to why. Like, why did this happen? Should I have taken this as a sign? Was this like an answer for me? And I think the reality is that I came to, and it comes back to really that like fight mentality is like, if I'm in the present, it happened exactly how it needed to. That was my reality, right? There doesn't need to be an answer. There doesn't need to be like, you know, it's it just is what it is. You don't need to explain it, right? So that was kind of the experience and the process that I went through.
Mm. I think that's powerful because I think a lot of people get caught up, myself included at times, in looking for the meaning or for the answer.
100%.
There doesn't need to be one.
Yeah. Yep.
I
Yep.
want to share a quote that I have here. I pulled this up before the podcast. However, it feels like it fits almost, in perfect step with our conversation. So I'm going to read it. And if you have any thoughts on it, I'd love to hear.
Yeah.
It's from Catherine May. I don't know who she is, but she said these words. We are in the habit of imagining our lives to be linear, a long
Mhm.
march from birth to death, in which we mass our powers only to surrender them again, all the while slowly losing our youthful beauty. This is a brutal untruth. Life meanders like a path through the woods. We have seasons where we flourish and seasons where the leaves fall from us, revealing our bare bones. Given time, they grow again.
Oh, I love that. I love that. It's interesting too. And I was listening to this and almost creating like this like visual in my brain. And it kind of reminds me of like the belief that I have around deja vu. Have you ever experienced deja vu and how
Oh,
fucking
yeah.
it is? You're like, oh yeah, like I've been here before, right? And I honestly think our lives, and I believe like we're born with a destiny, right? And our lives, if we were to like literally break down what destiny looks like, it's a straight line from start to finish. That's our life, right? That's destiny. That's the path that's already been chosen. That's it. Now, the reality of life is like we're going to make decisions, we're going to question destiny, and it starts to turn into like this like wave of lines that we actually create. And my experience of deja vu is like when I'm on that wave and I cross that line of destiny and I have this like little moment of like, why have I been here before? That's my
Mhm.
destined path. So I'm like, bring on the freaking deja vu. Am I here? Am I, what's happening? Right. And so that kind of reminds me of that is like, we're constantly looking for answers and things to tell us what's the right way and what's the path and what's this and what's that. And it's like we're creating these waves, which are really beautiful and really cool. And it allows us to see all these different experiences. And it really it adds so much color to our lives. And I do feel like the reality is like we weren't meant to go on a straight path, but our destiny is.
That's a really awesome way of thinking about
Isn't that
that.
kind of cool?
It is. It goes with a David Allen quote. He said, "Patience is the calm acceptance that things can happen in a different order than the ones we have in our mind." Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. And next time I have deja vu, that's exactly what
You're
I'm
going to
going to
be
think of.
like, I'm here. I've arrived. I'm good.
Yeah. Anything else to add on that?
No, I just think like our bodies and our present being, right? If you're in your true presence, right? I feel like intuition is the now. And the more that we try to lean into how does it need to be? What does it need to look like? How do I process this? Even in my experience not too long ago, I mean, we're talking like we got home in freaking November, right? And I'm still looking at like why, when in reality, if it just is what it is, right? And almost like take that pressure off of ourselves to try and figure it out and just be,
Mm, just
you know,
be.
just be, man. So that's all I got on that.
Before we move on to the next question, I do
Yeah.
want to ask, when you reflect on who you are, the qualities you have, are there certain qualities and characteristics that you got from your dad?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And it's funny because I feel like even in knowing these things, like through my mom, through his mom, through, my mom's mom, people that knew him, the longest, it's funny because they'll tell me like, oh, you got this like stubborn gene from your dad. And some way, as weird as this sounds, I already knew that. You know what I mean? Like I have these things where I'm like, I knew that. Like I it had to have. So it's really interesting. Yeah, I think there's definitely like the stubborn side. I mean, he was a professional weightlifter, so I like to think that like I got some of that in some way. Um, but yeah, I definitely think like the grittiness of life that I even experienced through the first, 18 years of my life with him. But there are also things that I tried on and didn't work for me that I learned from him, right? Like, I think he was probably the hardest working human that I'd ever met. And that hustle mentality, it's like, I really do feel like our generation is experiencing it in a different way. Like, we're glorifying this hustle when there's a lot of work that we can do to optimize it, right? I mean, he had like 3 jobs. So I always thought like, oh, I need to have 3 jobs. Like that's what success looked like, right? And I think there is a lot of that I learned even through his experience and through his lens, that worked for me for a very long time. And I've outgrown some of it, you know?
Mm, that's a great way of looking at that. And before we completely move on from this, I
Yeah.
do want to say that I think it's really powerful to be able to talk about your dad and those experiences in that chapter of your life. And I believe it was Thomas Campbell who said, to live on in the hearts that we leave behind is not to die. And it's clear that he lives on through you, and I'm sure through the rest of your family. And so I appreciate you sharing that.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to share.
Yeah.
Anytime I can, I'm like, wait, but did you know?
I love it. Well, so Mooch, that was a season of life that you did not get to choose for yourself. On the
Mhm.
flip side, what is the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose, and why have you chosen to do that thing?
Ooh. Oh, that's a great question.
You've got a long list in your mind. I can
I
tell you're
do.
going
I
through a
have a
long
long
list.
because I think there's different ways and different modalities that I
Mm.
experience challenge, right? There's the physical challenge, right? Coming up on another Boston Marathon, I'm like, give it to me, right? I think the physical is almost enjoyable for me. Like there's something about a physical challenge where I'm like, fuck yeah. The emotional challenge and the just the there's something different about that. That's learned, right? For me, that was a learned challenge that now I appreciate. Like I seek out the really emotionally challenging, like, how are you going to spin me this way? Like, flip it, twist it, turn it, whatever. Um, I think emotionally, the um honestly, it's so hard. There's so many. Like, I think grief is a big one. And I can put a blanket statement on that in terms of like challenge with grief, because there is such a victim mentality that you can take when it comes to grief. And I think the first couple times that was my mentality. Like,
Mm.
why is this challenge for me? Like it wasn't even about like, oh, it's for me. Like, no, you did this to me, right? To the point where and I just was having a conversation with my own coach about this. My parents both grew up going to church. I was raised Catholic. After my dad was diagnosed, we were all like, there's no God. There's no way there can be a God, which was really interesting because now I'm very much so on the spiritual side, right? Where I know that there's a higher, I know that there's a source, I know that there's something, and I feel actually really tapped into it more than I ever have. But I think the emotional challenge that I experienced the most was right around that like prime development years of my life, where I'm already thinking about I'm a victim, right? And then what happens and what grows from that mentality and that story that I so heavily believed in at that point, right? And then years, if not decades later, unlearning those things. I think those are the biggest challenges that I'm always constantly looking and exploring and playing around with now. But was it ever easy or fun? Hell no, absolutely not.
Unlearning is very challenging. Is
Oh.
there, outside of the victim mentality, is there something else that you've had to unlearn in recent years that's been really hard?
I think, kind of coming back to even what I learned through watching my dad like build his own business, right? When I became an entrepreneur, it was really hard for me to delegate. I thought I needed to figure it out. I thought I was the only one that needed to know how to do it. And if I was the entrepreneur and the leader, I needed to do it. Right. So the unlearning and I guess like implementing of new strategies, right, was a big challenge when I first started entrepreneurship. I think also, it's the unlearning, but it's also the releasing of, hey, this strategy doesn't work for you anymore. Like, congratulations, you outgrew something. Welcome to like your next level, right? There's another way to look at it where I think in even coaching business, it's like, oh, this isn't working anymore. Oh, I've been doing it like this for so long and now it's not working. It's like, cool, you outgrew it. right? And I think that even that mentality and that flip and perspective shift is, really has created a platform for me to see the power of story, and also the ability to rip power from a certain story and believe in something else.
Yeah, man, so good. I don't have the quote in front of me, but there's something about shoveling sand into a sandbox. That's your first draft, and then building a sandcastle, and that's your second draft. And sometimes if you want to build a different or bigger or better or more efficient sandcastle, you actually have to knock that one down and start again. And I love the concept of outgrowing something because it's easy to understand as we grow physically from a young age to young adults and adults. It's a good thing, right? Your shorts are too short, or your shirt doesn't fit because you grew 5 inches, right? That's great. But when we outgrow things in adulthood, or they're maybe more ambiguous, or they're not as tangible, it can feel like something is not working, when in reality, we just have to continue to move on, adapt, and evolve. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Of course. I love this stuff. So it's always fun to share.
What is the hardest part about entrepreneurship in your opinion, outside of what we just spoke on?
Mm, what we just spoke on was definitely challenging for me, just in even like my makeup of a human. I I would say, and just as I've seen in so many different entrepreneurs and in coaching them for years, there's a sense of looking and seeking for permission, or for validation, that I think our society is still really challenged by, right? Even with social media, how many likes did this get? Well, if it got a lot of likes, then it must be doing well. Oh, if it didn't get a lot of likes, it's not doing well. I'm gonna hide back in. So I think the permission, and the granting of permission that a lot of entrepreneurs wait for is something that, like, I wish we could break through a little bit more, because there's so much that you discover in just taking action, right? And this, it's like, just fucking do it, right? Like, there's really no other way to just try it, just go for it, right? And it's that same mentality of like jumping and building a plane on the way down. Um, which is actually really interesting because that's what my mom always says that I got from my dad. She's like, he would always jump and build a plane on the way down. And that has always been something that I feel like there's like some type of thrill about that in entrepreneurship, there's a lot of worry around, well, it's not perfect. Well, clients are going to think that this, or I'm not going to be able to do that. And I, I will continue to preach about it because I think there could be a huge shift in the way we build businesses and the way entrepreneurs work, if we can just crack through that a little bit.
Mm. Action creates clarity. And I might have even gotten that phrase from you, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, there's an O.R. Melling quote where he says, when you come to the edge of all that you know, you must believe one of two things: there will be ground to stand on, or you will grow wings to fly. And yeah, couldn't agree with that more. I am curious for you, though, Mooch, because from me knowing you, from how you present yourself on social media, it does seem like, although you do a lot of work, that you are really good at almost everything that you do. And that very well could be true. What
Stop.
is, well, to answer this then, what is one thing that people think is easy for you or assume is easy for you, but is actually really, really hard?
Mm, posting on social media. Yeah. I go through waves of it. Um, I go through waves where I'm feeling really inspired and it comes very clear. Like the downloads are just fucking clear. Right. And then there are times where I'm like, this is hard. Right. And I think the key for me is like, I never want to show up in a space where I don't feel whole. And I don't mean in a sense of like I'm upset or something's voided, or like I don't want to show up if I don't feel authentically able to,
Mm.
right? And that doesn't mean that it's not sad and crying or whatever, right? It's not even attached to an energy and an emotion. It's more like I'm not going to force it. Like I'm through that mentality of like it needs to be this way. Oh, if you want to show up as a coach, you have to, you have to, you have to. And that wasn't authentic for me. Um, so that's one thing. I think because I'm Italian, a lot of people think I love cooking. I actually don't. Um, my husband's actually a very good cook. And I just like don't want to make the time for it. I don't want to make the space for it. I'll eat super plain and that's fine. Like I'm okay with that. Um, but yeah, I think as it comes to business and entrepreneurship, um, I do think kind of that showing up and forcing it was something that I had to learn, I got to learn the harder way. I would say another thing that's challenging for me in more of the professional space is like shutting off, honestly. Um, I've been known to be a workaholic. I just love it. Like it doesn't even feel like work. But there are times where I have to have these moments with myself of like, okay, it's time, right? Greater vision says shut down. So shut down. But that is something that it's hard. It absolutely is hard.
You and me are too similar.
Yeah.
I also am Italian, also don't love to cook. Unfortunately,
A
my wife
sin.
well, unfortunately, my wife, unlike your husband, also does not like to cook. So we're in this limbo where food's a little weird. I also have trouble shutting off, and so I can relate on a deep level to that.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Two questions. One is kind of silly, but how often do you cry? You know, like on a let's take a monthly inventory of Mooch's cries.
There, I cried today, so we're
Oh,
back at that right now. Um, I would say probably more often than people would assume. Like, how many times would you think I'd cry
if we're going on a monthly
in a
basis,
month?
okay, nobody's ever turned this question back on me. I'm gonna say on a month, you cry 6 times.
Mm, actually, you might be about right. I would
Spot on.
say I usually multiple times a week.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say 8 to 10.
Was there a point in life where you tried to hold that back more
Oh,
so than
100%. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now I'm at the point where I'm like, I know when I need it. And I know when I need that energy release and that energy shift.
Mm.
But yeah, absolutely. Right. I think there's I mean, and especially in the Italian culture, right? It's like, no, 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 don't cry. Like, shh, baby, it's okay. Right. Like, even when you're little, it's like,
Yeah.
don't tell me how to feel. Like,
Mm.
I am a blob of emotion. Allow me to be. And I think there is something so interesting about, even how we were raised. And I don't know if you were raised similarly, but even just like the hush baby, don't say a word. Like, what
Mm.
the fuck? Like, what? It like is wild to think that that's what we had learned at such a young age. And whether it was subconscious or conscious now, like that was how we were raised, right? Stay in line, don't color outside the lines, don't do this, don't do that. Crying is a whole other thing, right? Crying was weakness.
Mm.
It was pain, it was hurt. And hurt means imperfection. And imperfection means you're broken. Do I believe that now? Fuck no. Absolutely not. Is it something that I think still lives in the waters of our world? Absolutely. 100%. I hear it all the time.
Yeah. I was with a group of people in the past couple months, and let's just say half girls, half guys. And the girls were talking about crying. I think a guy made a comment, and we started talking about frequency of crying. And
Mm,
between the women, it was, whatever, how many times a week. And between the guys, everybody was dumbfounded, kind of looking blankly at each other. Oh, I haven't cried in 10 years, or I haven't cried in my adult life. And And I do think it's a problem that needs to be addressed, and it is being talked about. Men's mental health, that whole realm is being explored more now than probably ever before.
Oh, 100%.
We have a
Yeah.
long way to go, though.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting that it's a sex thing, right? If we boil it down, right? It's interesting even in that, small sample size, the guys were like, I don't know, right? Um, but if we really look at the breakdown of how it impacts us emotionally, physically, like women honestly, yeah, sure, we're more sensitive, whatever. Testosterone versus estrogen, et cetera, et cetera. But like the impact that it has, both physically, emotionally, mentally, all of the above on any human, like I'll find ways to cry sometimes. I'm like, I gotta go stub my toe, or like I need something, because I do think that there's such a release in that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think release is the perfect word to use there. And just to acknowledge, we don't have to dive into this, that there are many different ways to release what needs to be released. And I think there are healthier options and maybe not so healthy options. And I think
Yep.
people need to explore all of them for themselves. And so with that being said, Mooch, this is the Project Endure podcast. When you hear the word endurance, what comes to mind for you? What does that mean to you?
Um, it's resilience to me. There's something about endurance that you're consistent, right? You can, um, without using the word endure, but I feel like there's a sense of like, I don't know how to explain this. This is like a feeling, so bear with me here. But it's almost like a sense of pressure and release at the exact same time, is how I could imagine endurance and what we as humans can endure. Because I think there is, again, like coming back to that light and dark side, right? There's both at the same time. And I think that's what produces this ability for us to endure different things.
Hmm. Nobody has ever put it like that. And I like it. I'm gonna have to think on that because it's a really unique take on endurance. And I almost want to bring it back to, let's say, marathon running, something that you and I
Oh,
both have
yeah.
some experience with. So are you running Boston this year? Is that what you
I
said?
am. Yeah.
Ooh. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. I'm doing hello. I'm traveling this weekend, so I'm gonna try and do my long run tomorrow, but I think we're supposed to get a little bit more snow in Boston. So your girl might be either running on her tippy toes in the ice or finding a treadmill to crank out some miles. But we got 18 tomorrow, so it
Ooh.
should be interesting.
18 on a treadmill is probably the equivalent of watching paint dry for a really
It's
long time.
Yeah, I'm gonna send all of your requests my way for podcasts, videos, everything, literally. Well,
Um, when you think of running the Boston Marathon this year, there's going to be a certain point, like in every marathon for almost everybody, where it's just going to really hurt and
yeah,
suck. Do you have something in mind that you will go to, that you will think of, that you will draw on, that will help you endure in that moment?
yeah, absolutely. So it's really interesting because I had just released a podcast this week, and it was all about this idea of like, there are things that you are going to naturally just not want to do, right? Whether it's your business, whether it's the 18-mile run on a treadmill, whether it's the really hard, shitty things, right? Which all about doing hard things. And I think what keeps that motor running is being so drawn in and so clear and so connected to the vision of why, that the really hard things, it's like, of course I'm going to do it. Like running 18 miles on a treadmill does not feel scary to me because I know my ultimate goal, and I'm so connected. And it's not even a goal, it's a vision. It's not like I need to run a certain pace or I want to hit this time. I think being so connected to like, I'm raising $10,000 for a charity and it's connected to, military families, like that for me, that's my vision. So me running 18 miles on a treadmill tomorrow in the middle of a Wednesday, don't care. Like there's no question. I think too, what's beautiful about the marathon is that energy and that camaraderie of like, cool, we get to experience what pain feels like. Welcome to living, because that's part of it, right? It's like, to me, it's just such a, it's I don't want to say it's a no-brainer because I think it took me a while to get to that point, but you're in these really dark places of a marathon, which I'm sure you can agree, and you're like, fuck, like this is what pain feels like. Okay, great. Like noted, right? But it's being really connected to that vision and seeing that vision as your end result.
Yeah, I think pain is a privilege, and just the fact that you are able to go out and run 18 miles in the snow and ice or on a treadmill is reason enough to tap into gratitude, to feel connected to a vision greater than yourself. And
Yeah.
I think that's really the key, a vision greater than yourself, because we're all going to face things in life, and most of us probably have already, that are bigger than us. They're stronger than just us, and until we can draw on something that's greater than us, we can't endure.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I love that.
So, Mooch, I'm going to ask you the final question, and I'm going to preface this. There's no pressure, right?
Okay.
That's not the intention of me saying this, but I'm anticipating that whatever you say, because I know you, I'll go back at some point and I'll listen to this during a tough day, a tough season, whatever. I don't go back and listen to many podcasts, but I think I'll re-listen to this part of this one. So if somebody out there is going through a tough time, they're
Mhm.
struggling, they're in a dark place, they don't know what to do or where to go, and you get to speak to them in their ears right now, what would
Mhm.
you say?
Oh, I love this. First of all, I would encourage you to pause and really tap into your breath. Like that is your sign that you're here, you're in the present. Next, I would remind whoever's listening, maybe it's you, I would remind them that you attract what you are. So if you want something, you're not going to attract it just because you want it. If you want happiness, you get to work on being that now. I think the universe speaks in love language. It really does. It doesn't speak in fear. It doesn't speak in negatives. It speaks in love. And the more that you can, and I'm getting real woo woo on you right now, but the more that you can tap into that love language of giving yourself grace. Because here's the thing, you're sitting there, you're having a shitty day. That's going to happen. I'm not here to promote that, like, never have bad days, no bad vibes. Like, I'm here for the low frequency. I'm here for that. And if it can show you anything, it's going to show you that you can endure, right? You can move through. And um, I think coming back to breath, remember what you want to attract and be that now, and give yourself grace during a period where it feels pretty dark.
I really appreciate that, Mooch. And I
Yeah.
know the people listening really appreciate it as well.
Yeah.
If people want to connect with you, if people want to follow along with what you have going on, or just reach out and say thanks, where should they do that?
Probably on Instagram. It's at CMooch, CMOOCH. And I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear.
Well, I would encourage anybody listening to reach out. Mooch, I appreciate you as always. Thank you so much for this conversation
Thank
and for
you.
sharing a little bit more about you.
Absolutely.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. And one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.